Hello, everybody. This is Joseph P. Farrell with news and views from the Nefarium on July 23rd, 2015. It's Thursday afternoon, kind of a hot one in some places of the USA. This is one that a lot of you sent me, and this is one for the transhumanism scrapbook. And I think this is a development we're going to have to look at over the next few years very, very carefully. This came from Bloomberg News, and the headline here is these superhumans are real and their DNA could be worth billions. And this is an article by Carolyn Chen. And I want to read a couple paragraphs from this kind of important development here, because there's a lot of things here that are falling into place that my co-author, Dr. Scott DeHart, and I wrote about in Transhumanism, a grimoire of alchemical agendas. It's kind of falling in line with some of the things that some of you have been predicting and that I've been blogging about on the website. So here goes. Stephen Pete can put his hand on a hot stove or step on a piece of glass and not feel a thing, all because of a quirk in his genes. Only a few dozen people in the world share Pete's congenital insensitivity to pain. Drug companies see riches in his rare mutation. They also have their eye on people like Timothy Dreyer, 25, who has bones so dense he could walk away from accidents that would leave others with broken limbs. About 100 people have sclerosteosis, Dreyer's condition. Both men's apparent superpowers come from exceedingly uncommon deviations in their DNA. They are genetic outliers, coveted by drug companies like Amgen, Genentech, and others in search of drugs for some of the industry's biggest and most lucrative markets. Now, I'm skipping several paragraphs at this point. Drug makers are also investing in acquisitions and partnerships to get their hands on genetic information that could lead to more drugs. Amgen bought an Icelandic biotechnology company, Decode Genetics, for $415 million in 2012 to acquire its massive database on more than half of Iceland's adult population. Genentech is collaborating with Silicon Valley startup 23andMe, which has sold its $99 DNA spit kits to 1 million customers who want to find out more about their health and family history. To more than 80% and have more than 80% have agreed to have their data used for research. I want to stop and make one observation about that right here, because one of the things that a lot of you and that I've been predicting is that these ancestry, these research your family ancestry through your DNA, that these are building huge data banks. And this history is allowing people to reconstruct the genetic history of mankind. Now, I've long suspected that part of this effort is on the part of the so-called elites to trace their own family history and bloodline and so on through genetic corroboration of ancient myth and so on and so forth. So that's one to watch. Anyway, continuing, Genentech is collaborating with Silicon Valley startup 23andMe, which has sold its $99 DNA spit kits to 1 million customers who want to find out more about their health and family history. More than 80% have agreed to have their data used for research. The Genentech partnership will study the genetic underpinnings of Parkinson's disease. And Regeneron has signed a deal with Pennsylvania's Geisinger Health System to sequence the genes of more than 100,000 volunteers. Underlying this is the plummeting cost of gene sequencing. It took $3 billion in 13 years from 1990 to 2003 to sequence the first human genome. The cost today is as low as $1,000 a patient, making it $1,000 per patient, making it viable to sequence large numbers of people and to discover relationships between genes and symptoms. The researchers who study outliers are often the first to realize the potential power behind a mutation. In 2010, Socrates Papapoulos, a professor of medicine at the Leiden University Medical Center in the Netherlands, visited, now listen to this, visited an isolated Dutch community where much of the population had overgrown skulls and abnormally large bones. At a town meeting, he asked if anyone had been in a major car accident. One man raised his hand. He said, I was crossing the street with my brother, and a Mercedes was coming, and I didn't have time to move. Papapoulos says, and I said, what happened? And he said, you should have seen the Mercedes. Skipping a few paragraphs here. Amgen scientists created hundreds of antibodies that they tested to determine which might be able to get in the way of various proteins from some of these genetic outliers. It took them 3.5 years of research before they were able to identify the best antibody to inhibit the protein. Then NASA came calling. In 2010, the space agency, preparing for its final space shuttle mission, was looking for promising research projects. It invited Amgen to test the drug's ability to stop the loss of bone mass often seen during spaceflight. Amgen sent 30 mice on the Atlantis shuttle. Half got the drug, romosozumab, and after 13 days, the injected mice had gained bone material density as the control group's bones weakened. Unquote. Now, what does all this add up to? And I think this is really kind of an interesting development, an interesting story, one I think that bears watching. Number one, as you saw, NASA's interested in this and in some of these outliers, particularly the ones that exhibit this sclerosiosis and the dense bones. So that's obviously something that NASA is going to be interested in if they can figure out how to stimulate those genes while astronauts are on spaceflight. But I want to point out two things here about this article. You have the focus on people with genetic mutations that prevent them from experiencing or feeling pain. All right. And if you'll remember the example that was given in this article, rather extreme pain, burns, and so on and so forth. And then you have this story about the genetic outliers who have very dense bones, so dense, in fact, that in some cases, a mild accident that would cause most of us with normal bone structure to have broken bones and what have you, these people don't suffer anything. So I'm going to suggest that not only is this interest on the part of big pharmaceutical companies, I suspect that behind them, as I said, there are three things. That number one, you're going to see an interest in the elites, old and ancient families, trying to prove their genetic history, family lore, ancient myth, and so on. And in fact, I blogged about the Sinclair family, the Sinclair clan, which is doing precisely this, and they're very public about it. But the second thing is, I think you're going to see an increased interest on the part of NASA, other space agencies, the Japanese Space Agency, Roscosmos in Russia, and so on, in these types of outliers for the ability to develop human potentials that will be needed for long-term spaceflight. And then finally, and this is the one that I think probably is really in play here behind the scenes, and that's DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, or as a friend of mine suggested that we call it here, the Diabolically Apocalyptic Research Projects Agency, because they are at DARPA working on the creation of the super soldier, the superhuman soldier, developing exoskeletons. Now imagine exoskeletons in conjunction with a human who has been genetically altered with massive bone structure to absorb injuries and do physical tasks that most of us would not be able to do, and also to absorb pain. So in other words, these things are going to be of extreme interest to agencies like DARPA, and they will, there's no arguing about this, they will use any techniques that they are able to create some of these quote unquote super soldiers or superhumans. So this is a development I think is really interesting. We're going to have to watch this, and the companies in particular that this Bloomberg article mentions that might be watched closely are Genentech, Amgen, Calico, uh, Regneron, pardon me, Regeneron, there we are, and 23andMe, and probably some other companies. These companies, especially if they have some sort of relationship to various countries' national defense establishment and things like that, that's going to be something to watch. And also if they have relationships with space agencies. So an important story in Bloomberg. I really want to thank everybody who sent this to me, because this is one for the transhumanism scrapbook. Anyway, that's it for today's news and views. Remember, everybody, we do have a vid chat tomorrow night, 8 p.m. U.S. Central Time. I will be on briefly overnight, Friday morning, 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. with Richard Hoagland. He's invited me on his show, which is right after Art Bell, to talk about the development and history of NASA and the Nazi influence in it. So anyway, that's it for news and views from the Nefarium this week. I'll see everybody on the flip side, and God bless.